We begin not with a bang, but with a silent handshake. Picture the dawn of human civilization, long before metal coins clinked, before bustling market squares. Imagine a small settlement nestled by a river, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth, perhaps 10,000 years ago, as nomadic hunter-gatherers began to settle and form agricultural communities. A hunter, his hands still warm from the kill of a deer, perhaps a particularly successful hunt yielding more venison than his immediate family could consume before it spoiled in the absence of refrigeration, finds himself with a surplus. He spots a toolmaker nearby, hunched over a piece of flint or obsidian, meticulously shaping a sharp new axe head, its edges glinting in the firelight. The hunter, recognizing the superior craftsmanship and the potential for a more efficient and safer future, approaches. His stomach is full for now, but he knows a better tool will make future hunts more successful, less perilous, and perhaps even allow him to hunt larger, more valuable game. He offers his surplus game, perhaps a portion of the deer or cured hides, for the toolmaker's gleaming, newly crafted axe. The toolmaker, perhaps having spent days on his craft and neglecting his own hunting, is hungry and recognizes the immediate value of sustenance. This simple exchange, driven by the immediate necessity of an empty stomach for the toolmaker, and the long-term desire for a more efficient hunting tool for the hunter, holds the primal seed of what we now call capitalism. It is the fundamental human impulse to carve, to specialize, and to trade, to leverage one's unique skills and resources for mutual benefit. This initial transaction, born of scarcity and opportunity, is the bedrock upon which complex economic systems would eventually be built. It represents the earliest form of value creation and exchange, a rudimentary market where goods were traded directly, satisfying immediate needs and foreshadowing the intricate web of commerce that would one day span the globe. The hunter values the axe more than his surplus meat. The toolmaker values the meat more than his finished axe. This subjective valuation and voluntary exchange, where both parties perceive a gain, is the fundamental engine of all market activity. For millennia, these exchanges remained confined, often a swapping of goods within village walls, hemmed in by muddy paths and the immediate needs of a community. Economic life was largely localized, characterized by subsistence farming and barter. Power often sprouted from the earth, rooted in land ownership and the rigid layers of feudal structures, particularly in medieval Europe from roughly the 9th to the 15th centuries. A lord's wealth was measured by the acreage he controlled, the number of serfs tied to his land, and the produce from his fields. Wealth was visible in physical possessions, stretching fields of wheat and rye, lowing livestock in stone enclosures, the imposing walls of a castle, and the bowed backs of serfs tilling the soil. This was an agrarian economy, where the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons and the bounty of the land, and social mobility was severely restricted. Labor was often coerced or tied to the land, rather than freely contracted. Yet, even within these rigid systems, the spirit of enterprise flickered like a distant torch. Merchants, their dusty boots traversing vast distances, often at great personal risk from bandits or natural disasters, stitched together disparate economies. They pulled shimmering silks from the east, navigating treacherous mountain passes and vast deserts, such as along the ancient Silk Road connecting China to the Mediterranean, to the cobbled markets of medieval Europe, carrying pungent spices from distant lands like India and Indonesia to the polished tables of the wealthy. These were the early risk-takers, the first entrepreneurs, their eyes scanning dangerous routes and uncertain demands, driven by the glint of potential profit. Their caravans, laden with exotic goods, moved like slow-moving veins across continents, and their ships, sails billowing with the wind across the Mediterranean and Baltic seas, were the arteries of early commerce, slowly but surely weaving a network that stretched beyond local boundaries, creating the first rudimentary supply chains. They were the intermediaries, connecting producers and consumers across vast geographical and cultural divides, demonstrating the power of arbitrage, buying low in one place and selling high in another, and the demand for goods beyond local production capabilities. This merchant class, though often viewed with suspicion by the landed aristocracy and the church, slowly accumulated wealth and influence, laying the groundwork for future economic power shifts. The true acceleration began with a revolution that swept through mines and workshops, a period of profound intellectual and technological transformation, often dated from the 14th to the 17th centuries. The Renaissance, its scholars dusting off ancient Greek and Roman texts in bustling Italian city-states like Florence and Venice, fostered a spirit of probing inquiry, humanism, and individual striving. It chipped away at the static, hierarchical worldview of the Middle Ages, which often emphasized communal salvation over individual achievement, throwing open mental windows to new possibilities in art, science, and the counting house. This cultural awakening celebrated human potential and rational thought, laying intellectual groundwork for economic individualism and secular pursuits, including the pursuit of wealth. Simultaneously, the Protestant Reformation, particularly Calvinism with its emphasis on predestination and the concept of a calling, laid down a theological justification for calloused hands, diligent work, frugal living, and the accumulation of wealth as a sign of divine favor. This doctrine, emerging in the 16th century, suggested that worldly success could be an indicator of God's blessing, profoundly shifting the perception of profit from a potential sin, as often viewed by the medieval Catholic Church, especially regarding usury, the charging of interest on loans, to a virtuous pursuit. This cultural shift, a quiet tremor yet profoundly reshaping, began to erode the old taboos against charging interest and commercial ambition, effectively anointing the pursuit of economic success with a moral legitimacy it had previously lacked. Max Weber, in his influential work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, first published in German in 1904-05, meticulously detailed this profound connection between religious belief and the emergence of modern capitalism, arguing that the disciplined, rational pursuit of economic gain was deeply intertwined with certain Protestant values, such as asceticism, hard work, and reinvestment rather than ostentatious consumption. Concurrently, technological innovations were reshaping the very fabric of the world, making large-scale commerce and the spread of ideas possible. The printing press, its gears turning under Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 in Mainz, Germany, democratized knowledge. It allowed for the mass production of books, pamphlets, and ledgers, spreading new ideas about commerce and governance, including debentry bookkeeping, a crucial ledger system for managing complex finances, tracking debits and credits, which was essential for the growth of large businesses. This systematic method, refined in Italian city-states by figures like Luca Pacioli in the late 15th century, provided unprecedented clarity and control over financial operations, making complex commercial ventures viable and reducing fraud. Advances in navigation and shipbuilding, such as the sleek caravel, a fast and maneuverable sailing ship developed by the Portuguese in the 15th century, propelled the age of exploration, tearing open vast new trade routes across churning oceans. Vasco da Gama's ship, the São Gabriel, rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1498, charting a sea route to India, forever altering global trade dynamics and bypassing traditional land routes choked by intermediaries and taxed by multiple rulers. This dramatically reduced the cost and time of transporting goods from Asia to Europe. Christopher Columbus's caravels, cutting across the Atlantic starting in 1492, connected two hemispheres, unleashing an unprecedented torrent of goods, like potatoes, corn, tobacco, and tomatoes from the Americas, and wheat, horses, cattle, and devastating diseases from Europe, resources, especially silver from South American mines like Potosi, Bolivia, discovered in 1545. And tragically, human beings in the transatlantic slave trade, which itself was a brutal, profit-driven capitalist enterprise, demonstrating the darker side of unchecked commercial ambition and the exploitation of labor for capital accumulation. The discovery of vast silver deposits in places like Potosi, Bolivia, and Zacatecas, Mexico, flooded Europe with precious metals, fueling further trade and the expansion of monetary economies, leading to what historians call the price revolution, a significant increase in prices across Europe due to the influx of silver. This burgeoning global trade demanded new financial instruments, like sturdy scaffolding for a growing building, to manage its scale and complexity. Bills of exchange, early forms of credit, allowed merchants to conduct transactions over long distances without lugging vast quantities of precious metal coins, thereby reducing the risk of highwaymen and facilitating larger, more efficient deals. These were essentially promissory notes, enabling payments to be deferred and transferred across cities and even countries, laying the groundwork for modern banking and credit systems. Joint stock companies, like the towering Dutch East India Company, Verenigd Oostendisch Compagnie or VOC, established in 1602, and the British East India Company, founded in 1600, pooled capital from multiple investors, spreading risk like a wide net and enabling ventures too vast for any single individual or family to undertake alone. Investing in these companies meant partial ownership and a share in potential profits, or losses. These companies were not merely trading entities. They were the blueprints for modern corporations, demonstrating the power of collective investment and the separation of ownership from day-to-day management. They often held monopolies granted by their respective governments and wielded immense political and military power in their overseas territories, effectively acting as quasi-states in places like Indonesia and India. Shares in these companies were traded, creating the earliest forms of stock markets, such as those that emerged in the bustling ports of Amsterdam and London, where the value of a venture was assessed and exchanged, allowing for both profit and speculative gambles, laying the groundwork for modern financial markets. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, founded in 1602, is often considered the first modern stock market, facilitating the trading of shares in the Dutch East India Company and other ventures. The concept of capital itself began to solidify, like a substance crystallizing from liquid. It was no longer just physical goods, like a pile of grain or a herd of cattle, but stacks of money, portfolios of investments in trading ventures or land, the whirring means of production, anything that could generate more wealth. This was a radical departure from the hand-to-mouth existence of subsistence economies, where wealth was often consumed or hoarded. Wealth was no longer a static treasure chest. It was dynamic, meant to be deployed, to grow like a living thing, to be reinvested in further productive ventures. This shift from static wealth to dynamic capital was crucial. The pursuit of profit became not just an individual's whispered aspiration, but a thrumming engine for economic expansion, fostering innovation and risk-taking on an ever larger scale, transforming societies from static hierarchies to dynamic, commercially driven entities. This period saw the emergence of a merchant class whose power was increasingly derived from their capital, rather than solely from land or lineage, challenging the traditional power structures of the feudal aristocracy. Mercantilism, the dominant economic theory from the 16th to the 18th centuries, sought to stuff a nation's coffers through a positive balance of trade, accumulating glittering piles of gold and silver, which were seen as the ultimate measure of national power. Governments actively reached in, subsidizing domestic industries through grants and monopolies, slapping protective tariffs on imports to shield local producers from foreign competition, and establishing colonies as bottomless sources of cheap raw materials and captive markets for finished goods. For instance, the British Navigation Acts, first enacted in 1651, mandated that colonial trade be carried on English ships, reinforcing the mother country's economic dominance and preventing its colonies from trading directly with other European powers. While not pure capitalism, as it involved significant state control and intervention, mercantilism laid foundational infrastructure. National markets, standardized currencies, and a recognition of the state's hand in economic affairs, albeit often a heavy, controlling one. It also fueled intense competition between European powers, sparking wars and further exploration, all driven by the desire for economic dominance and the accumulation of national wealth. This era saw the rise of powerful nation-states consolidating their economic might, often by wresting it from their rivals, viewing trade as a zero-sum game where one nation's gain was another's loss. The state became a crucial actor in shaping and directing economic activity, often for its own geopolitical ends and to strengthen national power against rivals. The Enlightenment, with its spotlight on reason, individualism, and individual liberty, provided the intellectual framework for a new economic philosophy that would challenge mercantilist assumptions, like a fresh wind clearing out stale air. Thinkers like John Locke, 1630–1704, in his Two Treatises of Government, articulated ideas of natural rights, including the right to property, which became a cornerstone of capitalist thought, asserting that individuals had a fundamental claim to the fruits of their labor and the possessions they acquired through legitimate means. This concept of private property was seen as essential for incentivizing work and investment, giving individuals security over their assets. The stage was set for a revolutionary concept, that individual self-interest, when channeled through free markets, could inadvertently lead to collective prosperity. This was a profound shift, moving away from state-controlled economies towards a vision of economic activity driven by the choices of individuals, guided by the unseen forces of supply and demand, rather than by royal decree or mercantilist mandates. The idea of a self-regulating market, free from excessive government interference, began to take hold, promising efficiency and greater wealth for all. This intellectual ferment, coupled with the practical advancements in commerce and finance, set the stage for the next great leap in economic history, moving from the state-centric mercantilist model towards a more market-centric liberal economic order. In the pivotal year of 1776, as the American colonies declared their independence from Great Britain, a Scottish moral philosopher named Adam Smith published an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. This seminal work did not invent capitalism, which had been evolving for centuries, but it provided its most coherent and influential theoretical foundation, effectively handing the burgeoning system its intellectual blueprint and a powerful philosophical justification. Smith articulated the concept of the invisible hand, arguing that individuals pursuing their own self-interest in a free market without excessive government intervention would inadvertently weave together the greater good of society, as if guided by an unseen force. Each individual, by striving to improve their own condition through productive labor and exchange, would contribute to the overall wealth and well-being of the nation by producing goods and services others desired. He championed free trade, advocating for the removal of tariffs and protectionist policies, open competition among businesses, and the division of labor, demonstrating through his famous pin factory example how specialization could dramatically swell productivity and lead to greater overall wealth and lower prices for consumers. In his detailed account, he described how a single worker, untrained in the craft, might make only a few pins, perhaps 20 a day, but 10 workers specializing in different stages of pin production, drawing out the wire, straightening it, cutting it, pointing it, grinding the top for the head, and so on, could collectively make tens of thousands of pins, perhaps 48,000 in a day. His work was a powerful argument for limited government intervention, advocating for economic liberty as a clear path to national prosperity, emphasizing the power of markets over the dictates of the state. Smith believed that the state's role should be limited to protecting property rights, enforcing contracts, providing national defense, and supplying public goods that the market couldn't efficiently provide, such as roads, bridges, and education. This vision became the bedrock of classical liberal economics. Smith's ideas coincided with and helped to explain the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, a period of unprecedented technological innovation and economic transformation that began in Great Britain in the late 18th century, roughly from 1760 to 1840. The invention of the practical steam engine by James Watt in 1769, its pistons pumping rhythmically, providing reliable power for factories, mines, and eventually transportation. The power loom by Edmund Cartwright in 1785, its shuttles flying at speeds unimaginable before, mechanizing textile production and vastly increasing cloth output. And new methods of iron production, such as Henry Court's puddling process in the 1780s, its furnaces roaring with intense heat, dramatically increased the quantity and quality of iron, a crucial material for machinery and infrastructure. These innovations revolutionized manufacturing. Factories rose, their brick walls enclosing hundreds or thousands of workers under one roof, specializing tasks and dramatically increasing output. This marked a profound shift from artisanal, cottage-based production, where goods were made slowly by hand in homes or small workshops, to mass production in centralized facilities, fundamentally altering the organization of labor and the very fabric of society. The factory became the symbol of this new economic era, a place where raw materials were fed in one end and finished goods poured out the other on an unprecedented scale, driving down costs and making goods accessible to a wider population. The application of scientific principles to production, coupled with the availability of coal as a new energy source, unleashed an explosion of productive capacity. The factory system, while spewing immense wealth and new products, also brought significant social upheaval, like a churning storm. Rapid urbanization, as people migrated en masse from rural areas seeking work, led to overcrowded cities, often lacking adequate sanitation, with rivers choked with industrial waste and air polluted by coal smoke. For many, harsh working conditions were the norm. Workers, often migrating from green rural areas with little experience in industrial labor, faced long hours. 12-16 hours a day was common, sometimes even longer for women and children, under flickering gaslight, dangerous machinery that could snatch a limb or crush a body, and wages that barely kept body and soul together, with little to no legal protection. Child labor was common, their small hands working looms or navigating narrow mine shafts, and wages were often subsistence level, leading to widespread poverty, disease, and social distress. Families lived in cramped, unsanitary tenements, often sharing rooms, and life expectancy in industrial cities like Manchester or London was often significantly lower than in rural areas. The stark inequalities generated by early industrial capitalism fueled new social and political movements, including utopian socialism, advocating for ideal communities and cooperative production, and later, Marxism. Karl Marx, observing the appalling conditions in industrial England from his exile in London, would famously critique capitalism in Des Capital, Volume 1 published in 1867, arguing that it inherently exploited labor. By paying workers less than the value they created, the concept of surplus value created alienation from their work, their products, and their fellow humans, and would inevitably lead to class conflict and revolution, ultimately to be superseded by communism, a stateless, classless society. Marx posited that the capitalist system contained the seeds of its own destruction. Through increasing immiseration of the proletariat and ever-deepening crises of overproduction due to the inherent contradictions of the system. Despite these criticisms and social costs, the capitalist engine continued to accelerate, its gears grinding faster. The 19th century witnessed an explosion of innovation and global expansion, fueled by new technologies and a relentless pursuit of profit. Railways, like iron serpents, crisscrossed continents, linking raw materials to factories and factories to markets, dramatically speeding up transportation. The first public railway, the Stockton and Darlington Railway, opened in England in 1825, quickly followed by vast networks across Europe and North America, such as the Transcontinental Railroad in the US. Completed in 1869. Steamships, their smokestacks belching, traversed oceans, dramatically reducing travel times and costs for goods and passengers, making global trade more efficient than ever. The telegraph, its wires humming with electrical signals, connected distant markets almost instantaneously, facilitating global commerce and financial transactions, allowing for rapid price discovery and communication. Samuel Morse's invention in the 1830s radically sped up communication, allowing businesses to react almost in real time to market changes and coordinate vast enterprises. Entrepreneurs like Andrew Carnegie forging vast steel empires that built America's infrastructure. John D. Rockefeller controlling the flow of oil through Standard Oil, powering the new industrial age. And Cornelius Vanderbilt, master of railroads and shipping, amassed vast fortunes, building industrial empires that reshaped economies and societies. Their methods were often ruthless, characterized by monopolies, trusts that swallowed competitors, and intense competition, but they also drove efficiency, lowered costs for consumers, and laid the groundwork for modern industrial society. This era, often dubbed the Gilded Age in the United States, roughly 1870–1900, showcased both the immense productive power of capitalism and its capacity to carve society into starkly unequal layers of immense wealth and widespread poverty. The intense competition also led to cycles of boom and bust, with frequent economic panics and depressions, such as the Panic of 1873 and 1893. These industrial titans, often called robber barons by critics, were also pioneers of modern management and mass production. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw the emergence of modern financial systems, like complex clockwork, designed to manage and channel this immense capital. Central banks, like the Bank of England, established 1694, but becoming a true central bank with a mandate for monetary policy in the 19th century. And the Federal Reserve, a new guardian in the United States created in 1913 after a series of financial panics, were established to stabilize financial markets, regulate the money supply, and act as lenders of last resort, catching falling institutions during financial panics. These institutions provided a degree of stability to an increasingly volatile financial landscape. Stock exchanges matured, becoming sophisticated platforms for capital formation and investment, allowing individuals and institutions to participate in the growth of corporations by buying and selling shares. The New York Stock Exchange, for example, grew to become the world's largest, facilitating the flow of capital to rapidly expanding American industries. The concept of limited liability, which shielded investors from personal financial ruin if a company failed, their liability was limited to the amount of their investment, spurred further investment and risk-taking, making it easier for large enterprises to raise the massive amounts of capital required for industrial expansion. This legal innovation, widely adopted in the 19th century, was critical for attracting a wider pool of investors and funding the massive infrastructure projects and industrial expansions of the era. The growth of commercial banking, investment banks, and insurance companies further solidified the financial architecture supporting capitalist expansion, creating a complex web of intermediaries that channeled savings into productive investment. The 20th century presented both towering triumphs and profound challenges for capitalism, like a ship sailing through calm waters and then into a storm. The two world wars, while devastating in human cost and destruction, World War I from 1914–1918, World War II from 1939–1945, also spurred technological innovation and industrial expansion, particularly in the United States, which emerged from World War II as the dominant global economic power, its factories humming with unprecedented production capacity. War production stimulated demand, accelerated industrial techniques like assembly lines, and integrated women and minorities into the workforce in greater numbers, particularly during WWII. However, the Great Depression, beginning with the stock market crash of 1929, its ticker tapes screaming with falling prices, exposed the inherent instability of unregulated markets, leading to widespread unemployment, reaching 25% in the US. By 1933, soup lines stretching for blocks, widespread poverty, and a profound crisis of confidence in capitalism itself. Banks failed by the thousands, factories closed, and international trade collapsed as the global economy seized up. This crisis prompted a significant reevaluation of the role of government in the economy, as millions faced destitution and the system seemed on the brink of collapse, with calls for radical alternatives like communism gaining traction. The traditional laissez-faire approach seemed utterly inadequate to address the scale of the economic catastrophe, forcing a fundamental rethink of economic policy. Economist John Maynard Keynes, in The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, 1936, offered a powerful intellectual response to the Depression. He argued that governments could and should intervene to stabilize capitalist economies, particularly during downturns, through fiscal government spending and taxation, and monetary interest rates and money supply, controlled by central banks' policies, like a careful hand on the tiller. He believed that markets left entirely to their own devices could get stuck in prolonged periods of high unemployment and low demand, and that active government intervention, such as public works projects or tax cuts, was necessary to stimulate demand and restore full employment. His ideas profoundly influenced the New Deal in the United States, a series of programs and reforms enacted under President Franklin D. Roosevelt from 1933 to 1939, including public works projects, like the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration, which employed millions, Social Security, providing a safety net for the elderly and unemployed, and financial regulation, like the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, which separated commercial and investment banking to prevent speculative excesses, and the post-war welfare states in Europe, leading to a period of mixed economies where government played a much larger role in regulating markets, providing social safety nets, like unemployment insurance, public health care, and subsidized housing, and stimulating demand through public spending. This era, often called the Golden Age of Capitalism, from the 1950s to the early 1970s, saw unprecedented economic growth, rising living standards for many, the expansion of the middle class, and a significant reduction in extreme poverty in developed nations. It demonstrated that capitalism could be managed to deliver broad societal benefits, like a well-tended garden, through a balance of market forces and state intervention. The Bretton Woods system, established in 1944, also created a framework for international monetary cooperation and fixed exchange rates, further stabilizing global capitalism and fostering international trade. The latter half of the 20th century was also defined by the Cold War, an ideological struggle between capitalist democracies, led by the United States, and communist states, led by the Soviet Union, like two titans locked in a stare-down, from the late 1940s to 1991. This rivalry spurred innovation in technology and economics, as each system sought to demonstrate its superiority, leading to an arms race and a space race, with both sides pouring resources into scientific and industrial development. The competition for global influence was not just military, but also economic, with each side promoting its economic model as the path to prosperity and freedom. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, its flag lowered over the Kremlin, was widely seen as a triumph for capitalism, ushering in an era of globalization where free markets and democratic ideals spread across much of the world. Countries like China, while maintaining a one-party communist political system, embraced market reforms under leaders like Deng Xiaoping starting in the late 1970s, gradually liberalizing its economy, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty, and becoming a global economic powerhouse, demonstrating a unique hybrid model of state-directed capitalism where the government maintains significant control over key industries and planning while allowing market forces to drive growth. This socialism with Chinese characteristics became a powerful testament to the adaptability of market mechanisms, even within non-democratic political structures, proving that economic liberalization could be decoupled from political liberalization. The information age, driven by the Internet's invisible web and digital technologies, further accelerated globalization and created entirely new industries and business models. Companies like Microsoft, its software on every screen, revolutionizing personal computing starting in the 1980s. Apple, its devices clutched in every hand, transforming communication and entertainment from the 2000s onwards. And Google, its search bar a gateway to the world, organizing information since the late 1990s, transformed how we communicate, work, and live, demonstrating the extraordinary power of innovation within a capitalist framework. The rise of Silicon Valley as a global hub of technological innovation epitomized this new era. Financial markets became increasingly interconnected, with capital flowing freely across borders, facilitated by instantaneous electronic trading, making global trade and investment on an unprecedented scale, often referred to as hyperglobalization. This period saw a renewed emphasis on deregulation and free markets, inspired by figures like Milton Friedman and the Chicago School of Economics, leading to a more neoliberal form of capitalism that prioritized efficiency, privatization, and minimal state intervention, often arguing that government was the problem, not the solution. This ideological shift, gaining prominence in the 1980s under leaders like Ronald Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in the UK, aimed to unleash market forces and reduce the size and scope of government, believing it would foster greater prosperity and individual liberty by removing perceived impediments to economic growth. This era saw a rollback of some Keynesian policies and a greater reliance on supply-side economics. Today, capitalism is the dominant economic system across the globe, though it manifests in diverse forms, like a river branching into many streams. From the state-backed capitalism of China, its factories humming under central planning and massive infrastructure projects, to the highly regulated social market economies of Scandinavia, such as Sweden, Norway, Denmark. Its safety nets woven tight with comprehensive welfare provisions and strong labor unions, and the more laissez-faire approach often associated with the United States, its markets roaring freely with less government intervention. The core principles of private ownership of the means of production, market exchange, and the profit motive persist. The unparalleled prosperity and technological advancement of the last 2 centuries are undeniably linked to its dynamic forces, like a powerful engine constantly seeking new efficiencies and opportunities. Global GDP has soared, poverty rates have dramatically declined in many regions, especially in Asia, and human life expectancy has increased significantly, all powered by capitalist innovation and wealth creation, which have lifted billions from abject deprivation, providing access to goods, services, and opportunities previously unimaginable. For example, extreme poverty, defined by the World Bank as living on less than $1.90 a day, in 2011 purchasing power parity terms, fell from 36% of the world population in 1990 to 9.2% in 2017, largely due to economic growth in countries that embraced market reforms, particularly China and India. Yet, capitalism faces profound challenges, many of which are intensifying, like gathering storm clouds on the horizon. One of the most persistent criticisms is its tendency to generate inequality. The gap between the richest and the poorest has widened in many countries, particularly since the 1980s, leading to social unrest, political polarization, and a sense of disenfranchisement among large segments of the population who feel left behind by economic progress. Critics argue that unchecked markets can lead to the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few, undermining democratic principles and creating a two-tiered society where opportunity is not equally distributed, with access to quality education, affordable healthcare, and upward mobility becoming increasingly stratified. The top 1% now own a disproportionate share of global wealth, a trend highlighted by economists like Thomas Piketty in Capital in the 21st Century, 2013, who documented the historical dynamics of wealth and income. Debates rage over progressive taxation, wealth redistribution mechanisms, universal basic income proposals, and the appropriate role of government in mitigating these disparities and ensuring a more equitable distribution of capitalism's benefits, without stifling its innovative spirit. The challenge is to foster economic dynamism while ensuring social cohesion and fairness, finding a balance between efficiency and equity. Another significant challenge is the environmental impact of relentless economic growth. The capitalist imperative for continuous expansion, often driven by consumption and resource extraction with little regard for external costs, has come at the expense of natural resources, leading to deforestation of ancient forests, such as the Amazon rainforest, oceans acidifying from carbon emissions, plastic choking waterways and accumulating in vast gyres, like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and the existential threat of climate change. Its temperatures rising and extreme weather events becoming more frequent and intense. The burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, a cornerstone of industrial capitalism, has led to a dramatic increase in atmospheric CO2 concentrations from pre-industrial levels of around 280 parts per million to over 420 ppm today, pushing global temperatures towards dangerous thresholds. The question now is whether capitalism can adapt to become truly sustainable, fostering green technologies, circular economies that reuse and recycle everything, and valuing ecological stewardship as a core principle, or if its fundamental drive for growth is inherently incompatible with ecological balance and planetary limits. This requires a fundamental shift in how we measure economic success, moving beyond GDP to include environmental and social indicators, and how we value natural capital. The concept of externalities, where the costs of production, like pollution, are borne by society rather than the producers, is at the heart of this environmental dilemma, as these costs are not reflected in market prices, leading to overproduction of environmentally damaging goods. Financial instability remains a recurring concern, demonstrating the system's inherent volatility, like a ship pitching on rough seas. The global financial crisis of 2008, triggered by reckless lending practices, particularly subprime mortgages in the US, the proliferation of complex, opaque financial instruments like collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, and credit default swaps, and insufficient regulation demonstrated the fragility of interconnected markets and the devastating consequences of systemic failure. Its ripples spread worldwide, causing deep recessions, massive job losses across continents, and a collapse in global trade. Governments and central banks intervened with massive bailouts, injecting trillions of dollars into the financial system, rescuing major banks and corporations, raising questions about moral hazard. The idea that institutions will take greater risks if they believe they will be rescued, and the appropriate level of regulation needed to prevent future crises. The Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act in the U.S., enacted in 2010, was one attempt to address these regulatory gaps, though its effectiveness remains debated. More recently, the rise of cryptocurrencies and decentralized finance, DeFi, presents both new opportunities for innovation and new regulatory dilemmas, posing challenges to traditional financial structures and central bank control, with their potential for both revolutionary financial inclusion and unprecedented speculative bubbles and illicit activities. The nature of work itself is being transformed, like clay on a potter's wheel, by technological advancements. Automation, artificial intelligence, AI, and the gig economy are reshaping labor markets, creating new opportunities for highly skilled workers in emerging fields, but also raising fears of widespread job displacement for those in routine tasks, wage stagnation for many, and the precarity of work for many who lack traditional employment benefits like healthcare, paid leave, and retirement plans. The social contract between capital and labor, forged during the industrial era with stable jobs and benefits, is under immense strain as traditional employment models erode. Societies grapple with how to ensure fair wages, provide adequate social safety nets for those displaced, and prepare workforces with the necessary skills for a rapidly evolving economic landscape. The demand for lifelong learning and adaptability has never been greater, as individuals must continuously reskill to remain relevant in the changing economy. The debate around a universal basic income, UBI, is gaining traction as a potential response to widespread automation and the increasing polarization of the labor market. Furthermore, the rise of powerful multinational corporations, often with revenues larger than many nation-states, e.g., Walmart's revenue in 2023 was higher than the GDP of countries like Belgium or Sweden, presents complex governance challenges. Their influence on public policy through lobbying efforts, their ability to navigate global tax systems to minimize liabilities, and their immense impact on local economies and cultures are subjects of intense scrutiny. The balance of power between corporations, states, and citizens is constantly shifting, prompting calls for greater corporate accountability and transparency, particularly regarding labor practices, environmental impact, and ethical conduct. Tax avoidance by large corporations, estimated to cost governments billions annually, diverts funds from public services and exacerbates inequality. Data privacy and the ethics of artificial intelligence are new frontiers in this ongoing struggle, as technology giants accumulate vast amounts of personal information and develop algorithms that can influence human behavior and shape public discourse, raising questions about surveillance capitalism and algorithmic bias. Looking ahead, the future of capitalism is not predetermined. It is not a finished painting. It is a system in perpetual evolution, constantly adapting to new technologies, social demands, and environmental realities. The debates surrounding its future are vibrant and urgent, touching on fundamental questions of justice, sustainability, and human well-being. Can capitalism be reimagined to prioritize not just profit, but also people and the planet? Can it foster inclusive growth, reduce inequality, and address climate change, while still retaining its innovative dynamism and capacity for wealth creation that has driven so much progress? The answer likely lies in a continuous process of adaptation and reform, like a sculptor refining their work, chipping away imperfections and reshaping its form. Governments, businesses, and civil society organizations are exploring new models. Impact investing, which seeks both financial returns and positive social environmental impact. Social enterprises, which blend commercial strategies with a mission to improve human and environmental well-being. Stakeholder capitalism, where companies consider all stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers, communities, and the environment, not just shareholders, as championed by organizations like the World Economic Forum. And stronger regulatory frameworks designed to curb excesses and promote public good. The fundamental principles of individual initiative, market exchange, and the pursuit of betterment remain powerful forces that drive human endeavor. But the form they take, the rules that govern them, and the societal values they serve will continue to be shaped by collective choices, by our shared understanding of what constitutes a fair and sustainable economy for all. From the simple exchange of a hunter and a toolmaker millennia ago, to the complex global financial systems of today, capitalism has been a driving force of human progress, lifting billions from poverty and spurring unparalleled innovation. It is a testament to our innate desire to create, to innovate, and to improve our lives. The journey continues, marked by both triumph and tribulation, as humanity grapples with the profound power and complex consequences of this unseen hand that shapes our world. The story of capitalism is, in essence, the ongoing story of human ambition and adaptation, a narrative that is far from over.